concept of voice. Voice. And, you know, as a sermon writer, you just kind of sit there and let this run around your brain and see what eventually starts making some sense. And the first thing that popped for me was his master's voice. Now, some of you remember this, right? There's a gramophone, and the big ear coming out, and there's the dog going. I can hear it. I hear the voice. So we have here in our collect, grant that when we hear his voice, we may know him who calls us each by name and follow where he leads. So there's the sermon. Jesus uses the idea of a shepherd, which was very, very common in his time. The shepherds would gather the sheep into the villages at night where they were safe, into the sheepfold. The shepherd who was on duty that night would sleep. The shepherd was the gate. The shepherd would sleep in the opening. There was no swinging gate because wood is too expensive. And so the shepherd would actually sleep in the opening and be the gate. And then in the morning, everybody would come out to gather their sheep to take them out to pasture. Now, here's a whole herd of sheep, right? Big as this room. And the shepherds are standing around the edge, whistling and calling. Now, I'm sure you've seen the sheepdogs, right? Where they're whistling at the sheepdogs and telling them the sheepdogs are running around. And well, they didn't have the sheepdogs. They were the sheepdogs. They whistled and called to the sheep, and the sheep knew the shepherd's voice. And so you have all of this cacophony, and you would think, and then you see these sheep go over here, those sheep go over there, and everybody goes to their own shepherd. They recognize the voice. Now sheep, which you probably know because this is sheep country, are dumb. Really. I mean, they're not as dumb as turkeys are, just saying so. But they are dumb. But they, even they, recognize the voice of the one who keeps them safe. So the voice of God is calling you by name. What is your response? Do you recognize the voice? There's two parts to this. There's the recognition of the voice and the response. Are you willing to respond? So the first thing that God is calling you to do is to recognize yourself as a child of God. And then God is calling you to act as a child of God. Now in the Bible we have a fair amount of son language, and Jesus uses this. that you are the son, I am the son. What does that mean? It's been translated into our parlance as child. The real issue here is being the heir. Okay? If you are the son, then you carry the seal, right? The stamp of the Father. And you could go out and do business on behalf of the Father. And if you had that seal and you made that stamp, the Father was responsible for anything you did. And so there was this great responsibility being the son, because you were doing business in the Father's name. Okay? And we are sealed, right? In our baptism, we have the seal. a seal. We have been sealed with the sign of the cross in our baptism, at which point we are speaking and acting for Jesus. We are the hands and the feet. We are the mouth. We are the presence of Jesus, or not. There was a recent Guidepost article about a guy who pretty early in his life was convicted that he needed to be a minister and he was going to be God's soldier out there and do battle for God. And he worked and worked and worked and did good work, ended up in a big church, worked hard, and his wife kept saying, "Hello?" And his children quit inviting him because he never came to their events, because he had more important things to do for the Lord. It wasn't until he had a really serious major heart attack and he was laying there in bed going, "I've got so much work to do." And his children came in, his adult children came in, their faces gray with fear. And he finally saw it. And he saw the anger on the face of his wife. And then he heard the voice. "I want you for a son, not a soldier. I can fight the battle just fine." We have to be quiet enough to hear the word for us personally. And it comes in many different ways. Sometimes somebody will say something and you just kind of go, "Got it. Okay, I got it." And sometimes that word can change. In fact, we should expect it to change. As we go through life, things change, and we need to change. And then we go back to God and say, "All right, what's the word for now? How am I to be here for you in this situation?" God is calling. What do you hear?